Good morning. If you would take your Bibles and put your bookmark in 1 Samuel chapter 10. We're going to look at a lot of passages from Samuel this morning, so if you'll start there, you'll be ready as we make various references. We have a lot of visitors with us today. We appreciate you being here, taking time to worship with us, whether you're passing through, whether you live here locally. If we have the opportunity to study with you, if you have questions about the things that we're doing here, we would welcome those. Some of you I got to meet before services, some of you slipped in. I kind of got distracted this morning. Among those that are visiting is Russell Gage and his wife. I knew Russ when he was, I think we decided 10 years old, and I first met him when I was working the Florida College camp at Dry Creek, and I was 19 or 20. His dad, Byron, has preached for years and years, did great service for the brethren, and so a lot of memories there, some of which I'd love to forget, some of which I have forgotten, but it's neat to see people from your past, especially way back in your past, and to know that they're faithful to the Lord. And so that's an encouragement to me, guys. I appreciate you so much. And all of you that are visiting today, we're glad to have you with us. I hope our study will be of some profit to you. A word of explanation as we start, for those of you that are visiting, our theme this year, we've tried to kind of maintain some consistency in our teaching in regards to coming back and touching on things once a month. Our theme this year is they being dead yet speak. And we've tried to take some Bible characters that are well known, some of which are not so well known, and make some applications for us as God's people based upon the things that we find about them in their lives. And so we do this at the first of every month, and this being the first Sunday in March, and the day, by the way, after Texas Independence Day, which makes it doubly significant. We're going to follow with our theme this morning. And I want to talk to you a little bit about Saul. And not only Saul, but Saul and his son Jonathan. You know, a lot of Bible characters that are almost revealed to us in pairs. And when you get to thinking about one of them, you almost are forced to think about the other one. And so you start going back, Adam and Eve. We don't ever preach just about Adam or about Eve. It's always Adam and Eve. Cain and Abel fall into that same kind of category. Isaac and Jacob. Jacob and Esau as brothers. Joshua and Caleb. You can't hardly say one without saying the other. Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Elijah and Elisha. Ahab and Jezebel. Mary and Martha, and then you got the triplets, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, never just one of those guys, and Peter, James, and John. And you could keep going on, Paul and Barnabas, Paul and Silas, etc., etc. And it is interesting to me that sometimes when God tells us about one character, He tells us about two because they are to be appreciated in the relationship to one another. I would suggest to you most of the time when we think about Saul, who is a fairly well-known character, we think about Saul relative to David. And I do think that God sets them in comparison to one another because God wants us to understand some things about them that are very different. Saul is the king man wanted. David is the king God wanted. And very quickly when we start thinking about Saul and his story, and Saul's story starts in 1 Samuel 10, runs through the end of 1 Samuel. Very often, his story is so intertwined with David that we can't think of one without the other. And what gets lost in that is the role of Jonathan. It's easy to think that David is the antithesis of Saul. But I want you to appreciate that in many ways, it is his son Jonathan that really provides the contrast and balance to his father's story. So, I want to talk with you a little bit this morning about Saul and Jonathan. They being dead yet speak, and so the question is, if they had a chance to talk to us, what would they say? I think they would say some things that are very similar in nature, and then I think that they might disagree about some stuff. But here's the first point I would make. I think Saul and his son Jonathan would both tell us that the key to really success and victory in life is simply the concept of faith. And I know that we talk about this a lot. I had somebody tell me the other day, hey, I listened to a couple of your sermons. I was off at a meeting. Listened to a couple of your sermons, and you just keep coming back to faith over and over. And my reply to that was, well, thanks a whole lot. I really am glad you see that, because the older I get, the more I appreciate that everything that we do relative to our relationship with God has to come back to the idea of the concept of trust in God. And you really see this illustrated in both Saul and Jonathan in their lives. Go back to chapter 10 when we're first introduced to Saul. And if you remember the story, Samuel has gotten older. He's kind of been the national leader both spiritually and in many ways politically and even militarily. And as he has gotten old and his sons become judges in Israel, his sons are not moral men. And the leaders of Israel come to Samuel and say, your sons are not like you are. We need somebody strong to lead us. We want a king. Samuel's very upset by that, goes to God, and God essentially says, give them what they want, but tell them what it's going to cost them. And so God sends Samuel, and Samuel anoints Saul to be king. I want you to notice a couple things about his early rule. In chapter 10, when Samuel first anoints Saul, he makes the point to him in verse 7 that he was going to see some indications of God's approval. And he says to him, let it be when these signs come to you that you do as the occasion demands. I want you to see at the very outset that Saul's reign as king was very much involved in his relationship to God, and that God was going to be working with him in the things that he did, even as he saw circumstances arise and felt compelled as the ruler of God's people to do these things. What Samuel says is, God's going to be with you in that. Now he offers a rule for him, verse 8, you shall go down before me to Gilgal, surely I will come down to you to offer burnt offerings and make sacrifices of peace offerings. 7 days you shall wait till I come to you and show you what you should do. So it was when he had turned back to go from Samuel that God gave him another heart, and all these things came to pass. So at the very outset, Saul's rule as king and his key to success as king is connected to his relationship with God. And that's important to understand. Because what we see as we go along studying Saul is that his relationship with God suffers, as he has less confidence in God, less trust in God, as he does not keep the rules that are set before him, he starts to fail. But he doesn't fail initially. Go over to the next chapter, if you would, in chapter 11. We find that the Ammonites have taken the city of Jabesh Gilead. And Saul's rule really begins here. They've besieged the city, and the men of Jabesh basically say, give us a week. Give us a week to find somebody to fight for us. If we can't find anybody to come help us, then we'll be your servants, and it'll cost us all our right eye. That's what the Ammonites said. We'll make a covenant, but we're going to put all your right eyes out. Did I say that right? All your right. I'm going to put the right eye of every one of you out. We don't have plural eyes. Okay. David and I talk about grammar all the time, and so we're going to put your right eye out. All right. And so that's the condition. Well, Saul finds out about this. They send messenger out. Saul finds out. Saul is enraged. In verse 6, the Spirit of God comes upon him. His anger is greatly aroused. He takes a yoke of oxen, he cuts them up, sends them all over the nation, and said, if you don't come fight with Saul, then this is what we're going to do to your oxen. Well, some 30,000, 36,000 men show up to fight. And a week later, they are at Jabesh Gilead, and they win this great victory because Saul's confidence is in God. In fact, notice, if you would, in verse 13, when Saul was first made king, there were some men that weren't crazy about him being made king, and there was the suggestion made at the end of this battle, anybody who thought Saul wasn't going to make a good king, let's just go kill him now. And Saul's reply is, not a man shall be put to death this day, for today the Lord has accomplished salvation in Israel. Notice that Saul doesn't say, I have led you in a great victory. What he says at the very outset of his rule is, God has accomplished something through us here today. And I think that's an aspect of Saul that we don't appreciate very much. Now, file that away right quick. Move forward a couple of chapters to chapters starting in 13 and then into 14, and we're introduced to Jonathan, Saul's son. And what we see in Jonathan is much the same kind of disposition toward God that we saw in Saul. In chapter 13, we find that Saul's engaged in a battle with the Philistines. Saul's been the king for a little while at this point. He's kind of got a standing army. And you will notice that Jonathan is one of his rulers. He has got 1,000 men, and they are stationed in the city of Gibeah. And Jonathan, being quite a forward young man, in verse 3, attacks the garrison of the Philistines. And when the Philistines heard about it, they gathered an army together. And you would notice in verse 5 that it says the Philistines gathered together to fight with Israel, 30,000 or 3,000, depending upon the version that you are reading, chariots, and 6,000 horsemen, and people as the sand that's on the seashore in multitude. And Saul has a standing army of 3,000 men. For those of you that were in the Judges class, do you remember what the problem the children of Israel had with the Philistines was when they first took the land? Philistines had iron chariots. And it always seemed like the people with chariots were a threat, and God's people had problems with them. Now, they won victories when they put their confidence in God, but very often, confidence in God went out the window when a guy comes rolling up in a chariot. And so you have an army that is huge compared to an army that is 3,000. And if you look in chapter 13, verse 6, when the men of Israel saw they were in danger, people hid in caves and thickets and rocks and holes and pits. Some of the Hebrews crossed over the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. Saul's still in Gilgal, and all his people are trembling. And he waits for Samuel, and Samuel doesn't show up for 7 days. And if you know the story, he goes and loses his patience and offers a sacrifice. When you get to the next chapter, here's Saul and his people have deserted him and he's scared to death. And in chapter 14, Jonathan gets the grand idea that if he and his armor bearer would go over to the garrison, now this is what started this whole thing. They went and attacked the garrison, and the Philistines came down on them, and now the Philistines are gathered all around them. And what is Jonathan's mindset? Hey, let's go attack another garrison. That worked out really good for us. So he takes his armor bearer, and he is going to go basically from one hilltop through a valley, climb up the other hill, and attack a garrison of the Philistines. But I want you to notice what he says about this. In verse 6, Jonathan said to the young man who bore his armor, "Come, let us go over to the garrison of the uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us. Nothing restrains the Lord from saving by many or by few." Verse 9 or verse 10, if they say, "Come up to us, we will go up, for the Lord has delivered them into our hand. This will be a sign." And then you get down to verse 12, "Come up after me, the Lord has delivered them into the hand of Israel." And what happens next is they go up, they have a fight with the garrison. Jonathan and his armor bearer win this great victory. It scares the Philistines because they've dealt with God's people before, and they all start running. And God's people, the Israelites, they start coming out of hiding. And they don't have weapons of war, we learned at the end of chapter 13. They've got axes, they've got spears, they've got sickles, they've got harvesting implements, but they don't have any swords, they don't have any shields, they don't have any spears, and yet they win this great victory simply because Jonathan understands that if God's fighting for them, nobody can beat them. And the statement is made at the end of chapter 14 when there is a conflict that once again God has delivered, verse 45, great deliverance in Israel. What do we learn from this? Well, what we learn is these people that accomplish great things in the Bible accomplish great things because they had confidence that God was going to do that for them. In fact, there's an interesting thing at the end of chapter 14 that very seldom gets noted. Chapter 14 and verse 47 says, "So Saul established his sovereignty over Israel and fought against all of his enemies on every side, against Moab and the people of Ammon and Edom, against the kings of Zobah, against the Philistines. Wherever he turned, he prospered against them." What we don't appreciate about Saul is that Saul was a very successful king for much of his reign. Mark read for us from 2 Samuel chapter 1. After Saul dies, that passage, which is a praise of Saul and Jonathan, was written by David. Now, this is after Saul's been trying to kill him for years. And it's written by David, and what that passage says is that Saul adorned his people in scarlet and gold, that they won battles all around, and that mighty men had fallen in Israel. This is inspired language. We don't see the success of Saul. We don't appreciate the victories of Saul. We are so consumed sometimes with his downfall that we forget the kind of impact that he had not only upon God's people, but upon his son. For the rest of the story, Jonathan is a faithful man. Even when Saul begins to try to kill David, Jonathan's always on the side of truth. He's always on the side of David. He is very loyal to David. He is very loyal to God. And he is very loyal to his father. Where did Jonathan's trust in God come from, pray tell? I would suggest you it probably came from his father. Because in his early days, Saul was a man who had great trust in God. Hey, I haven't given the invitation song yet. Man, I wish everybody was that enthusiastic about the lesson, okay? Everybody come down to the front row and let's just... I want you to appreciate that something about Saul in his youth prompted his son's faith. And what both of them understood was that we win when we are faithful to God. Now there's the lesson for us, folks. We talk about faith. I talk about faith a lot. I think faith is exceptionally important. It's not just this idea of believing in God, and it's not limited to what you do initially in order to have your sins forgiven. Faith is not limited to the steps that go before baptism. Faith is this idea that God is in control, that Jesus sits upon the throne, that all authority is His, that the kingdom of Jesus Christ is actually the kingdom that is in power in this universe, and that everything I do needs to be done with an appreciation that God's in control, that Jesus has already won, and that I am on His side and He's on my side. And what that means is, if I'm at work and I have to deal with the forces of Satan, with those who are trying to promote evil, and I am asked to stand up for what is right, that God is as surely with me as He was with Saul and with Jonathan. And I don't think we see service to God that way. I think sometimes we're afraid to stand up in our day and age and deal with the forces of wrong that are here unless it has to do with our vote or politics. Now, politics will scream and holler with everybody. But the reality is when it comes to morality, when it comes to influences around us, when it comes to our family, when it comes to raising our children, when it comes to our local church, when it comes to every aspect of life, what faith does is faith obeys God, understanding that God wins. Even if it has to do with something terrible in my life. I have to do with illness. I have to deal with cancer. I have to deal with the loss of people that I love. I have to deal with division. I tell you, there's a lot of junk going on among some elements of God's people right now. And I've told you this before, and it scares me to death to see the kind of division that people are dealing with. But I want you to understand, God always wins. And my trust has to be in what He tells me and my day-to-day living of it. And when Saul and Jonathan did that, they won their battles. God promises us, folks, even if it doesn't happen in this life, that He will never forsake us. So I think what Saul and Jonathan would both say is, look, you need to understand that the key to victory is this ongoing trust in God. Second thing, I think that probably Saul, if he had the chance to talk to us, would say, you need to not become consumed with yourself. Do not become consumed with yourself. What was it that caused Saul's faith to waver? It was him. I think it was all of this success. If you go over to chapter 15, the most telling event in the life of Saul is really not David and Goliath. It's what happens just prior to that. And I think this is probably late in his rule. We know he ruled for 40 years. We know he defeated a lot of his enemies. I want you to appreciate, though, that as he became more consumed with himself and as he became more given to pride and self-absorption, what happened is that it destroyed his faith. And this is what happens to us. The more we become consumed with ourselves, the weaker our faith will be. That's the application. So see it in Saul. In 1 Samuel 15, God commands him to go and utterly destroy the Amalekites and their king Agag. And you know the story. He goes, he fights the battle, he wins the battle, but he takes Agag captive, and they take the best of the spoils, the sheep and the goats. And God's frustrated. God says, I've rejected him. This is where we learn about God choosing David, a man after his own heart, who's going to do all his will, which is different than Saul is at this point. And so Samuel is sent to Saul, and Saul, after going, notice if you would in chapter 15 and in verse 12, when Samuel gets to Gilgal and knows where Saul went up to Carmel, and indeed he set up a monument for himself. And so Samuel finally meets up with him and says, where you been? And Saul says, hey, I've won this great victory for God. I've obeyed God. And Samuel says, how come I'm hearing all this livestock out here? And Saul begins making excuses. Well, the people decided they were going to keep all that and offer sacrifice to God. And when Samuel presses him on it, he finally admits that he was a party to that as well, but that we're doing all of this for God. And this is the passage in verse 22 and 23 where basically Samuel says, God doesn't want your sacrifices. What God wants is your obedience. That's important to remember in this day and age where anything goes in worship. God doesn't want what we have to offer of our own accord. God wants us to obey Him. That's what faith does. But that's not what Saul did. Because, as Samuel tells him in verse 17, when you were little in your own eyes, were you not the head of the tribes of Israel? Everything that happens to Saul after this is an extension of his pride, folks. David kills Goliath. Saul immediately starts eyeing David. He's scared of David. He thinks David wants to become the king. He makes David a captain. David succeeds. Saul starts trying to kill him. He makes David his son-in-law, thinking the Philistines will kill him. David continues to succeed, and Saul becomes absolutely consumed, obsessed with killing someone who is innocent. Now, I want you to think about that for a minute. We see the conflict between David and Saul, but we don't stop and think, why is this? Because Saul is so consumed with his role as king that he's willing to kill somebody. This is where selfishness leads. This is what happens. You blame other people for your failure. Oh, it was the soldiers that brought the sheep and the goats to sacrifice. You start becoming paranoid about the activities of other people. Oh, they're out to undermine me or make me look bad, or they're out to try to destroy my kingdom and my influence. And you become obsessed with destroying other people. And that's what happens for the rest of 1 Samuel. Saul spends almost all this time, almost loses the throne to the Philistines because he is consumed with killing David. Have you ever kind of gotten full of yourself and just started looking at life based upon me? Have you? You don't want to say yes, do you? I'll answer for you. Yep, I've done that. Have you ever gone so far as to think, I'm going to kill this person? You know what you're thinking about that is? No, I would never do that. Wouldn't you? David did it. A man after God's own heart. Killed Uriah so Uriah wouldn't expose him. Do not think for a moment that being self-absorbed is somehow or the other going to work out to good for you. Jonathan is the contrast. He's the firstborn of the king. He's the heir to the throne. He has every reason to look at David suspiciously. But every time you see anything about Jonathan and David, what is he doing? He's supporting him. He is arming him. He's making covenants with him. He's coming to see him in the wilderness. He is warning him. He is trying to stop his father from him. Why? Because Jonathan was a humble man who just wanted to make sure things were right with his friend and with his God. Let me tell you something, folks. We talk about pride a lot, and especially in the Proverbs, pride is painted in these terrible pictures. I don't know very many people that I would say are just out and out proud of themselves in the sense that they look down on other people as less than them. I know a few people that are that way, but I don't know very many people that way. Do you? I tell you what I know a lot of. I know a lot of people who only think about themselves. They may not think they're better than everybody else, but everything in life is filtered through what happens to them and what they think and what they're going to have to do. And I fight this. I fight it all the time. And I'm going to tell you what that does. It ruins faith. Because faith is not about me. Jesus tells me to deny myself and take up my cross and follow Him. And it's only when I quit worrying about what I want, what I think, what my life is about, that's when we learn to trust our God. That's when we become obedient people. Self-absorption is the easiest sin in the book. And I think Saul would tell us and Jonathan would tell us, you better be careful about just thinking about yourself. Number 3. I think Saul and Jonathan, maybe Jonathan especially, would tell us that, hey, I want you to learn that you need to celebrate other people in their talent, in their roles, in their work for God. Once again, we see the contrast in the way that Saul and Jonathan treated David. David is winning great victories for God's people. He defeats Goliath. He goes on to become a captain. Every time he goes out, he wins these great battles. The whole of Israel is enamored of him. Jonathan gives him his own weaponry, his own armor. Everybody loves David. And you want to know why they loved David? Because David was doing God's work for the nation. And when Saul looked at him, he just saw a threat. He didn't care about God's work. Every time you turn around, David's hiding over here, Saul's chasing him. David's over here, Saul's chasing him. David's down here, Saul's chasing him. He's got thousands of men out running around the countryside looking for David, chasing David, trying to kill David, when David is God's man. Jonathan got that. It's interesting that as you get a little farther into the story in chapter 23, when David is hiding in the woods outside the city of Ziph, and Saul finds out about it. I can't hardly say Saul without putting the amen on the end. When Saul finds out about it, he sends these people after David, and Jonathan in verse 16 of chapter 23 shows up. It says, in order to strengthen his hand in God, and he makes the point in verse 17, do not fear, the hand of Saul my father shall not find you. You shall be king over Israel, and I will be next to you, and even my father knows that. Why did he know that? Because David was doing good for God. Jonathan celebrated it. Saul refused to acknowledge it. Here's the application for us. Let's just keep this local, although the application could be made far beyond here. Everybody in this building, especially those of you that are part of this congregation, everybody in this building is vital to the work of God in this place. You may not feel like you are. You may not do anything public. You may not teach class. You may not be as involved as you think. But I want you to understand, you're a young family that all you're doing right now seems like chasing the kids up the aisle. I remember it well. Mine would go the other way, okay? But I remember it well, and you look at that and you think, man, why am I even here? I'm going to tell you why you're here. Because that right there is important to this church. Because it says, I've got my kids there where they need to be. I understand we are the future of this congregation. I understand these kids are the future of God's people in this area. And I'm going to have them where they need to be. And while I may not do anything but show up and fight my kids, you look at these older people around here, and I guarantee you they're looking at that and they're going, bless your heart, what an encouragement to me. If all you can do is be here, that's important work. And I'm going to tell you, it's every bit as valuable as what the elders do, or what the deacons do, or what the song leaders do, or what the preachers do, because there are no first, second, and third class citizens in the work of God. And the sooner we all learn to appreciate each other for the abilities that we bring to the table, the more unified we'll be, the more we'll work together, the more we will encourage one another, and the stronger we will be. It's when we are severed and separated and divided over our laziness or our ignorance or various and sundry issues that we will not or cannot resolve, that's when the work suffers. We can't be Saul, who has no regard for somebody else's ability in the work of God. We have to be Jonathan. I see who you are. I see what you do. You help me. You encourage me. I want to encourage you. Our faith is too important that we deny each other's ability and help in this work. And that brings me to the last observation. I didn't tell you how many points at the beginning for a reason. 4 points. Here's the last one. I think Jonathan may especially would tell us, were he able to be back, failure in the people I love does not justify my failure. I'd love to know a little bit more about Jonathan. It speaks volumes to me that David had such affection for him. Not just loyal to him as a friend, but that David makes the observation at one point that Jonathan's love, Jonathan's this relationship, this friendship, this companionship, this caring for one another. He says, your love surpasses the love of women. Now, don't take that and pervert it like everybody wants to in our world. I think what that means is that he saw in Jonathan a friend who cared about him to a greater degree than he would ever find even in the husband-wife relationship. That's what I think David meant. And at that point in life, when Michal seems to have been his only wife, that's probably true. I'd love to know more about him, that David would have that kind of regard for this man. You know what Jonathan watched in his life, especially as his father got older? He watched his father lose his faith. He watched his father turn into a crazy man. He watched his father take a spear twice and try to pin his best friend to the wall. And then he watched his father try to do that to him. He watched his father lose any semblance of trust that he had in God, so much so, and this is ultimately where selfish leads, that before his life was over, he's off in a seance trying to get a dead man to come talk to him. Do you think that broke his heart? Do you think when he talked to David in the woods outside of Ziph and said, even my dad knows that you're going to be the next king and I'm going to be your right-hand man? Do you think he did that with a smile on his face and not a broken heart? I do not know a person who serves the Lord who hasn't watched somebody close to them leave the Lord. I've yet to meet someone who everybody in their family, parents, children, siblings, I've yet to meet somebody who didn't lose someone to the world, to Satan. For some people, it's been parents. That's really hard, especially if they started off faithful and then left the Lord. For parents to watch a child do that, I told Haley the other day, I said, you're about to learn a new level of love with this little kid you have, because you will never love me like you're going to love her. I believe that that's true. While it must be horrible to lose a parent, it's got to be even worse to watch a child walk away from the Lord. I want you to understand something about that. Jesus knew it would happen. Jesus told his apostles, you can't love your father or your mother more than me, be my disciple. You can't love your children more than me and be my disciple. You can't love yourself more than me and be my disciple. And at one point, Peter even asked him, look, we've sacrificed everything. Matthew 19, what do we get? What Jesus says is, look around. You lose father, mother, child, you sacrifice them being faithful to the Lord. When they're not faithful to the Lord anymore, you'll receive multitudes more people. And in the end, eternal life. And I'm going to tell you the key to dealing with the loss of faith in other people. It is the simple determination to appreciate that what God offers us in our relationships spiritually and in our eternal destiny is worth far more than the greatest feeling I will ever have for another human being in this life. And I'm not sure we're going to appreciate that till we get there. You want to talk about faith? There's where faith really starts coming into play. I think Jonathan would tell us, do not lose your trust in God because somebody you love did. You keep being faithful. You stand up. You serve the Lord. You be loyal to the people that you're going to spend eternity with. And what that needs to do for all of us is teach us to love each other who are brethren more than we love our physical families. Well, that's a goal, isn't it? That's a challenge before us, isn't it? But I may not spend eternity with my 3 girls. I don't know if they're going to stay faithful to the Lord. But those of you that are faithful, I'm going to spend eternity with you. And it's going to be joyous and glorious. And there's not going to be any regrets about this life. I don't know how God's going to do all that. Maybe because we're going to understand sin and justice and faith in ways that we've never understood it before. But folks, I do believe that Jonathan would say, don't quit serving the Lord because you've lost people that you love to the world. Saul and Jonathan is an interesting story to me. Not just because of the relationship with David, but just each other. Jonathan fights on Mount Gilboa with Saul at the end of his life, knowing everything that's happened with his dad, knowing where his dad's convictions are, knowing that he's no longer trusting in God to the point that he's having seances with witches. But Jonathan's a loyal man, a faithful man, a godly man. And he's concerned about God's people and God's nation, and he fights to the death. And when David finds out, he tears his clothes, he pours ashes on himself, he mourns and weeps because the mighty had fallen in Israel. Saul and Jonathan are talking. Are we listening? If you're subject to invitation this morning, we invite your response while we stand.